Welcome back to This Week in Immigration. I'm Rachel Iacono, Project Associate with BPC's Immigration Project, and I'm happy to be joining you as host this week. On this week's program, a special Thanksgiving episode. Stick around. On this episode, This Week regular Theresa Cardinal Brown, Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at BPC, will host some timely conversations with special guests. First up, how to talk about divisive immigration issues around the dinner table with Wendy Feliz, Director of the Center for Inclusion and Belonging at the American Immigration Council. And later, an immigrant's perspective on her first Thanksgiving in the United States with immigration fellow Sadikshya, Nepal. But first, to kick us off, last year, the Bipartisan Policy Center hosted a unique Thanksgiving meal with Democratic and Republican members of Congress, the press, and advocates of all different ideologies. While the pandemic prevented us from doing this in person this year, we replicated the spirit of that dinner by inviting members to share a pie we sent them and their thoughts on the importance of bipartisanship and bridging divides. Here's what they said.
Why don't we kick this off? Delighted to be here with everybody. As you all know, the Bipartisan Policy Center has tried to make Thanksgiving gatherings a bit of a tradition. And while we do not have the benefit of being together with so many of you in person like we did last year, we've decided to improvise. And I think improvisation will be actually a theme of today's event. I expect there are going to be a lot of audibles called at the line anytime you got a dozen members of Congress pretending to show up at the same time. You know, that always requires a little bit of nimbleness. But we had a really great experience last year. I think last year our imagination was that Thanksgiving was one of those rare moments when different generations and ideologies and people from different regions all actually had to sit down together and talk to each other. And so last year we really kind of focused on just the challenge of how do you have a good political conversation with your family. Right? Our view was if families can't talk about the issues they care about, it's hard to expect that all of our elected representatives are going to make that work. We obviously don't have that same option this year. And so this year we started to really think with everything that's just kind of grinding on the country in these really difficult moments where our democracy feels like it just might not be able to hold up. We started thinking, well, what is it that really unites us all as Americans? And what are the deepest values that we can really call upon? And it occurred to us that a warm slice of pie wasn't a bad place to start. So what we were able to do this year was connect with a number of the members of Congress we've just had a great time working with. We were able to send some pies out. Not sure how the post office is recovering from the election, but hopefully several of you have received those. We also had really the opportunity and honor to make some donations to a number of food banks around the country. We could not coordinate those with you, but they were geographically relevant choices. And what we are trying to just do here for a little bit of time today is just share a couple of the thoughts about the things that we are actually still very thankful for and talk a little bit about our imagination for what we can do next year to start to move the country forward. The members of Congress on the phone are mostly members from our American Congressional Exchange. This is a program where Democrats and Republicans spend a couple of days in each other's districts. I think Derek Kilmer, who took one of our original trips, said, if you want to know where someone's coming from, it's actually really great to see where they come from. And that's kind of been the abiding insight behind this program, which we think has actually done a lot to create kind of the intangibles, right? The soft skills that enable people to actually trust each other enough to venture a creative idea or actually, move the country forward. And so we're taking advantage of that. We also have a couple of, BPC recidivists, those of you who just keep coming back to our programs, and we appreciate that a great deal. So we'll be turning to our members of Congress in just a moment. But I think we really wanted to focus on the power of food, right? I mean, we all have an incredibly diverse country, and while that at times is challenging, I think one of the moments that it's really inspiring is when we think about those kinds of cultural differences that can bring us all together. We also want to think a little bit about fun. And so we've created our second annual Family Thanksgiving Guide to a Healthy Democracy. I don't know if we can get that on screen or not, but we've put together this holiday guide, and we are sharing that around with many. Thank you, Salud. it has some substantive issues right up front, right? We suggest that families spend a little time talking about issues like immigration and climate change and healthcare. We try to figure out, what are some of the shared values and core beliefs that unite us as a country. And so while we are going to be potentially distant this Thanksgiving, we felt like it was important to give people an opportunity to really, in a constructive way, lean into those discussions. And then if you could just toss the back up for a sec, this is the fun part. We have a word search for the kids. We have, coronavirus, remdesivir, fracking, Amy Coney Barrett. It's a good Fauci, Zoom. It's the kind of the issues that really will motivate kids to want to ask tough questions to their parents, and a little bit of trivia. And so I should now actually begin our program, and just to get us started, again, as we really thought about the power of pie, I turned to one of the friends of BPC who is just a delightful human being, Jose Andres, many of you know, who is people call him a celebrity chef, but he's really much more than that. He's a bit of a national treasure who has just poured himself and his life into so many communities in need. He's actually in Honduras now, but he was able to share a 5-minute video, just his reflections on just the critical importance of pie to American society. So we're gonna hear from Jose, and then we will start to interact with the members of Congress who are on the line.
People of America, congressmen and congresswomen, I am Chef Jose Andres. It's great to be here with you and all the members of Congress who are sharing messages of bipartisanship, empathy, and respect. This is a time to think about what unites us versus what divides us. We, the people, all American, under one flag. It seems that sometimes there is so much dividing us, but you and I, we know that in reality, there is even more that keep us all together. More than anything, it's food that has the power to bring people to the table. I will say shorter walls and longer tables is the way to move forward. It's a plate of food in difficult times that shows that somebody else cares and that tomorrow may be a better little tomorrow. And during Thanksgiving, it's food that brings our families together and reminds us to be grateful for what we have, even when sometimes the turkey may be dry, or the stuffing may be cold, or the mashed potato may be a little bit looking like glue. But these are the good moments that we always remember around a table with the people we care for. So on that spirit is why I love that the Bipartisan Policy Center has decided to focus on pie this year. Well, we may be disagreeing on politics, which is healthy, done with respect. But there is something about warm piece of pie that is truly universal, and I know can be bringing all of you together more than ever. We like to say that things are as an American as apple pie, right? Well, did you know that the first pies were actually enjoyed by ancient Egyptians going back 6,000 years before Christ? Also, the Romans and the Greeks made some big improvements. But it was the Spanish, people like me, who perfected the savory cheese pie at some point around the 13th century. My cheese pie is unbelievable. One day I hope to cook it for you. But then, in the year 1545, is when we can say that the first recipe for sweet fruit pie was published in England before being brought across the Atlantic at the time of the American Revolution. So we know that famous pie lovers included Mrs. Martha Washington or luminaries like Mark Twain. So, pies play a big role in pop culture. From Friends to Stand By Me to Game of Thrones, we've seen pies all over the place. And the song American Pie by Don McLean is one of the most popular in modern history. Even if the Thanksgiving turkey will be dry this year and next, at least we always have apple, pumpkin, and pecan pie to keep us coming back. And that's why it's so important to celebrate the traditions that makes us who we are. Even in this era of political polarization, we must come together to the table and find solutions to the biggest issues facing Americans. This Thanksgiving, there are record numbers of hungry families in our country. There are millions of people who are finding the American dream to be a little too far from their reach. So, let's be thankful for what we have. Let's put our differences aside and let's unite to work as hard for those we don't know as for those we do. Together, we can build on the important work of the BPC to celebrate bipartisanship and create a better tomorrow.
So, look, it's been really just terrific and fun for us just to have a little bit of time with so many of the members who we're so fond of and who we're relying on a whole lot to help us, get the democracy moving forward a little bit early next year. I want to now turn this over for a kind of closing pie benediction to BPC spiritual leader, who is, of course, Dan Glickman. Many of you know former Congressman and Ag Secretary Glickman, but Dan has been really with us from the beginning. And when I think about someone who can really combine just deep politics and aesthetics and occasionally even a little bit of humor and a lot of food, I always think of Glickman. So I'm going to raise my pie, but Dan, do you want to take a moment and send us out?
Unfortunately, Jason, I didn't get the pie, but I brought my own cheesecake. So
that's very ethnic. That's fine. It's solid.
So first of all, I want to say that it's great to see the members here. I served in Congress back shortly after the Civil War, but I have to tell you that it's the greatest job in the world you folks have, without question. The most freedom, the most ability to actually do what you want, say what you want, and actually get things done, even in this troublesome time that we are sometimes in. And I see a few people, that Alan Lowenthal and Salud and others that participate in the Don Bacon and the Aspen programs that we run. So I thank you. So I'm thankful because tomorrow I will be 76 years old. I've lived 76 years. So I think I'm older than anybody else in this room, probably. I don't want to offend anybody, but I know I'm much older than Capri, much, much older. But I would have to tell you that there's two kinds of pies that really get me at this time of year. One is my favorite, which is chicken pot pie. Not a normal pie, but it's the one that's probably the most nutritious. As the former Secretary of Agriculture, I have to worry about nutrition and health. And so that is one that I really like. And nutrition is a big part of the old USDA line. The other one is, I recall my favorite Bible verse is from the prophet Micah, who says, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God?" And so I thought to myself, my other favorite pie is humble pie, which is something that we don't probably eat very much. And humble pie is kind of a metaphor for being forced to apologize and publicly admit our mistakes, our errors. And, there is such a thing as humble pie. It was actually made from the entrails of animals, of what they call offal, O-F-F-A-L, if you've ever been into a meatpacking plant. They take that, and some parts of the world, they still make this thing called humble pie. I'm not sure they call it that way. And I'm not recommending it to anybody because I think the pie you sent out is the best pie, Jason. But I would say that in this time of Thanksgiving, it's a pretty good time to look at our past and what we can do in the future, not only to admit our mistakes, but to really go forward and make this country a better place, respecting each other and doing the kinds of things that all of you talked about, which is trying to work together in a bipartisan way to solve the problems of our country and earn the respect of our constituents. So saying that, Jason, I toast everybody and thank you and the BPC for everything you do to bring people together.
And your friendship means a lot to us, and the ability to get a good savory pie and a metaphor in there is very consistent, true to form, so thank you. So look, everyone, I don't get to say it enough, but we just deeply appreciate the ability to work with y'all. As Dan said, I think it is an incredible opportunity, but it's an incredibly tough job y'all have. And our ability to provide a little bit of staff support and hopefully a little bit of moral support is really what we look forward to every day. So I hope everybody has a good holiday. The holidays post-elections are supposed to be a time of a little bit of exhale and rest up, a little bit of time to forget the election. And so I hope everyone has a chance to be with family and celebrate safely, and really eager to get together with y'all on rural broadband and urban broadband and infrastructure and some smart reforms to the tax code and a lot of work on public health. So really, again, it's been a pleasure and honor to work with you, and everybody has a great Thanksgiving.
So we'd like to welcome to the podcast Wendy Feliz. Wendy is director of the Center for Inclusion and Belonging at the American Immigration Council. The center houses the culture and narrative change programs of the council, and Wendy has a very long history in communications and public policy advocacy. She's an adjunct communications professor at Georgetown University and has an MA in public communications from American University. Wendy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Theresa. I'm so happy to be here with you.
So we wanted to talk to you about that probably least comfortable part of Thanksgiving tradition, and that is having the conversation with that difficult relative who disagrees with you on politics. But let's start with something a little easier. How are you going to be celebrating Thanksgiving this year?
I'll be celebrating with my partner and his parents in a very low-key family dinner. They're my pod, and so we're all just kind of hanging out together, having lots of great traditional Thanksgiving food and some traditional Colombian food, because my partner's family is from Colombia.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So even though this year is going to look a little different for a lot of us, we may not have that difficult relative in the dinner with us because we're all social distancing, but there may be Zoom calls or conference calls or other things. So from your work, what are some of the biggest challenges in talking about difficult issues like immigration in today's political climate? What makes it so hard to have these conversations?
I think there's a few things, but I think specifically what makes it hard to have conversations is that most people are not interested in having a conversation. They're interested in showcasing their knowledge, their point of view, their worldview. And that's not actually a conversation. That's more like a lecture. And so I think, we have to get into a new practice of deciding if I really want to have a conversation with someone, that means I have to care enough to listen. That means I have to care enough to take off my political alarm system and have a conversation with someone. And often it is our family who don't always share all of our views on politics. If there's any year where we need to be really grateful for having our family, it's this year. So many people have lost loved ones. And so maybe this year can be a reminder and a reset that, that I love my family and I care about my family and we have some differences. So I'm going to sit here and be a better listener and try to have a more genuine conversation with them and not lecture anybody.
Yeah, I think, going back to 2016 and the presidential election then, I know that, in my family, there were Trump supporters who kind of lorded it over the Clinton supporters. And this year we may have the reverse of that. How do you kind of get past that and get to that place of listening? Like where do you start with that?
Well, you're right. And it's hard. People are hurt. They're a little angry. It's been a difficult election season. People have really dug their heels into their, into their person that they wanted to win. And so really what we're going to have to do is, number one, understand that people were angry and hurt, and half of the country got the guy they wanted, but the other half of the country didn't get the guy that they wanted. And so I really think in the spirit of moving this country forward, really, we have to just figure out how to begin to listen to each other and rebuild those connections and those bridges that we may have kind of burned in the past over politics. Even the president-elect has made it pretty clear that he wants to move past this division and really get people to start connecting. I mean, one of the things that everybody could agree on this election season, and we see it over and over again, is people say they're tired of division. Yet, they don't know how to make it stop, and they don't always take responsibility for their role in that division. And so what I think, a great act of patriotism that we could do in the year ahead is to be the change we want to see in the world, right? That old saying, but really truly decide that I'm not going to rub it in. I'm not going to lord over anybody. I'm going to try to understand why 70 million people voted for the other guy who didn't win. And I think we've painted people that voted for the former president or soon to be former president, with a really broad brush. And I think there's lots of reasons people voted for President Trump. And so we really should get back to trying to listen and understand one another. And I think really that truly is like probably the greatest act of patriotism we could take moving forward.
Yeah. So for those of us in the immigration field, I think even before Trump came on the scene, immigration was one of those issues that could be a hard conversation to have with people. Why do you think immigration can be such a difficult conversation to have?
Well, unfortunately, immigration has become a culture issue. It's really not a political or a policy issue, even though all of us that work in Washington feel it is a political and policy issue, and it is for us. But for the rest of the country, it's become a cultural issue. And that's not really a good place for it to sit, because if you think of some of the big culture battles over the last 40 years, things like abortion, those things get very stuck and people get very emotional and very heated over them. So we actually really need to figure out the way to turn down the temperature on immigration. Honestly, we need to make it boring again so that most Americans wouldn't really be paying attention. And every, 5, 6, 8 years, we update our immigration laws to be responsive to our economy and to generally what the country needs. And no one would blink another eye. But we can't do that right now because people have dug their heels in so deep because they tied up all these other values into the issue of immigration. And so it really is up to us to start to mount the work and the strategies and the conversations and the campaigns and projects that can depolarize the issue, because it's just become one more thing that the country has become divided over. And we really got to make our way out of this, or we're kind of going to be constantly stuck in this deadlock between the two sides.
Yeah. I know one of the experiences I've had, I'm sure you've had this too, is that you start talking about immigration with somebody and they will start saying what they think are facts, and you know that you have different facts. And how do you break through that? I mean, you say you want it to become boring again, where people kind of don't pay attention, but you have to have some sort of understanding about what immigration means and even the boring facts. So how do you break through that?
I think there's a few ways you do that. I mean, all of us in Washington tend to peddle in the facts, right? And we work at think tanks, so that makes a heck of a lot of sense. But for many people in this country, it's a very emotive issue. They're not making a rational argument. They're making an emotional argument about the threat that they perceive that immigration might represent for them, for their family, for their financial well-being, for their children's future. And you can certainly try to talk people out of things by using a rational argument, but when it's become such an emotional argument for people, it becomes a little difficult. So how do you start telling emotional stories about this? I mean, I think it's a lot of storytelling, quite frankly. And it's also understanding that, we forget only about a third of Americans have a deep connection to someone who is foreign born. About 2/3 of Americans walk around not really knowing anything about an immigrant or an immigrant's experience, except for what they hear in popular media And obviously, what they've been hearing for the last 4 years about immigration or immigrants has been really negative, and it's reinforced a lot of negative stereotypes. And so I think storytelling, whether it's in the first person by someone who's foreign born themselves, sharing sort of their story and what they've gone through, or you sharing stories about friends that you've had where someone says, I just don't think, for example, refugees are vetted well enough or asylum seekers are vetted well enough. And then you can say, hey, let me talk you through my friend's story and all that they went through to migrate to the United States, or why someone didn't wait in line. Or there's like a million, facts that we can push back on facts with, or we can tell some real human stories. And more importantly, maybe not this year, but next year, invite some foreign-born people to your Thanksgiving dinner and actually have a real conversation with people and understand their lived experiences. But at the same time, the best way to get people to listen is for them to be listened to. So you have to make sure everybody at the table is listening to each other's lived experiences. They say in behavioral psychology that being listened to is a gateway drug to empathy. We have to listen to people, and they will surely listen to us. And then we start to build that mutual understanding, and we start to beat back some of those stereotypes. And that is far more powerful than, 5 more good facts on what immigration means to America.
Yeah. Over the last couple of years, we at BPC have been having different conversations and roundtables with groups of people around the country. And one thing I find is that if you get people started on a conversation and let them talk about whatever their experience is, and then somebody else pipes in and you keep it at a civil, you kind of check your own reactions, if you will. Eventually people come around to this sort of very pragmatic idea of what immigration should be for America. And there's a lot of consensus there. They want, they believe that immigrants can be good for America. That's almost universal. They're not sure if the current system is helping that. They're not sure if immigrants right now are doing so, but they can imagine it being that way. And could we get there? And I think for me, that's a great place to start. If you can imagine a system and a set of rules for immigration, feeling like it's all good for us, and incorporate the people who are already here. There's a lot of understanding that people are already here. We're not going to kick them out. That seems to me to be a good place to start, at least getting people to think about it less emotionally and maybe a little more rationally. What do you think about that?
I think that deliberative dialogues are fantastic, and we've seen them over and over again where people do bring people together to have this sort of a thoughtful conversation. It's not always the first step for everyone. Some people aren't even ready to have that rational conversation quite yet, and maybe what they really need is a good storytelling experience. Maybe they need a really good experience in their community where they do a community beautification project with a bunch of people who are refugees. Like, other people have first starting points, like I know in Washington, we always think we can talk everything out and bring everybody together. But I have family that would never go to a deliberative dialogue on immigration. Like, that's not going to happen. It's like they need some other first steps. And I think that's what we just have to understand. Everyone's in a different place on their journey. And we have to find a way to reach. There's a lot of people in America that don't want to talk about policy at all. They don't want to talk about politics at all. Policy and politics has a terrible reputation around the country. People rather, go soak their toes in the river. They're just not going to come and have that conversation.
Yeah.
So for those that are willing, I think you're right. And I think the listening piece and sharing stories and life experiences is really powerful. Understanding the obstacles the system puts forth for newcomers. And then I think sort of coming up with pragmatic solutions is absolutely what Americans do. It's what we've always done, right? We can do this again. And
we just have to remember how it works, right?
Yeah, we just have to remember how it works. Absolutely.
Well, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us on This Week in Immigration. I wish you a great Thanksgiving with you and your pod, as we will be having Thanksgiving with my pod as well. Thanks so much and take care.
Thanks, Theresa. Happy Thanksgiving.
So Sadikshya is herself an immigrant from Nepal, and we thought that we would ask her to talk to us a little bit about an immigrant's experience of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a uniquely American holiday. It has a mythology around the first Thanksgiving and pilgrims and Native Americans and turkey and stuffing and a whole lot that goes with it that a lot of immigrants to the United States aren't familiar with. So Sadikshya, let me ask you first, When did you first hear of Thanksgiving, and what did you think about it? What did you hear about it?
Yeah, so because it's like like the US holidays have such a global dominance over the world. Actually, it didn't preclude us from knowing what Thanksgiving was when I was growing up in Nepal. Hollywood is omnipresent. So I think there is a story of like younger children who watch American movies, growing up knowing about pilgrims and then the Mayflower, all of that coming in. And then there's the stories of my parents who probably were like, what is going on when we first arrived? So I would say that maybe around like as a teenager, we watched a lot of like Christmas movies, a lot of Thanksgiving movies. So in Nepal, like that's probably my first introduction to Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So when did you come to the United States, and how did you arrive?
So my family arrived when I was 16, and my father actually was a recipient of the diversity visa lottery. So we arrived with, it was me, my father, my mother, and my brother. So four of us came together in 2004.
And what did you do your first Thanksgiving in the United States? Do you remember that?
Yeah, so because you want to make the turkey, you want to like kind of participate. And I think the driving force was probably my brother and I who were like, we should do Thanksgiving. It's fun. So we did make turkey, not the stuffing and anything, because you don't know like the whole the sides and stuff. That was like years in learning that like you eat mashed potatoes and stuff like that. I didn't know any of that. So the first Thanksgiving, I would say that it was just turkey. And then rice, because South Asians, like we eat a lot of rice. So it was very bland. And I think that has pretty much dissuaded my parents from eating turkey forever. Like, so they're not big turkey people. They did not enjoy it, as many immigrants can, I think, say that. So yeah, I think it was when we were 16, when we had first arrived.
Yeah. So turkey is not native to Nepal. So I imagine it's not a staple of Nepalese cuisine.
No.
Did your parents even know how to cook a turkey, or did they ask friends? Did they call the Butterball hotline?
we just put it in the oven. And also, I should mention that in Nepal, like we don't have ovens. Like we had never operated, so we're not big bakers. So we had never operated an oven, and it was a trial and error that like very much failed. I remember years later, after I started, like I didn't go to a real Thanksgiving dinner until in my early 20s. So my parents' like turkey making ability still is pretty poor, because I remember they had given me leftover turkey to take home and make sandwiches, and I brought it home, and the next day I woke up to like sizzling pan in the kitchen where my mom had put like a ton of cumin powder and turmeric and made it into a turkey curry, because she was like, I don't really know what else to do with this. It just doesn't taste like the flavors we eat.
Actually, turkey curry sounds good to me.
Yeah.
So what are you and your family doing this year?
Well, this year is a bit different. I usually spend it with my husband's family now, and I've been going to their house for years.
And your husband's American?
My husband's American, yeah. And that's where I've learned all about like the turkey food traditions. Mm-hmm. But this year, I think I'm just going to spend it at home. My brother has a new wife who's just arrived from Nepal right after the quarantine started, actually in April. So this is her first Thanksgiving. And we are making plans on like making Thanksgiving dinner. It doesn't involve turkey. It involves stuffed chicken, because I think my family has finally decided that turkey is not the way we do it. So we make baked chicken, we stuff it. We do everything that requires like Thanksgiving meal prep, but we do it with chicken. And the sides are very Nepali.
Like what?
Too. Like, so you have mashed potatoes, but then it has cilantro and hot chili peppers in them.
Yeah.
Instead of cream and like salt and pepper.
So as far as, you've written a blog post for the Bipartisan Policy Center talking a little bit about your integration journey from an immigrant to the United States. How do you feel now, these years later, about Thanksgiving, about that mixture of your native culture and the American culture?
I think I've actually acquired a taste for Thanksgiving now. Like I said, I go to my husband's house, and I've been doing that for the past 10 years now. And even when I was trying to explain to my sister-in-law that, she is kind of like, oh, what is Thanksgiving? Like, how do we celebrate it? What are the foods? I always tell them, like, turkey is an acquired taste. You're not going to like it at first, but you just have to give it a shot, and maybe you'll love to like it. I do now. Like, I even enjoy my husband's grandmother makes turkey and the stuffing and all of that, and I enjoy it. Mostly, I enjoy just they drink a lot of wine and watch football, and we're from
They
Massachusetts.
do watch football.
Yeah, and we're from Massachusetts, so they're big Patriots fans. So they only play the Super Bowl games the Patriots have won. And so we watch football, and so it's just a nice day to eat and drink and watch TV
and be with family.
Yeah.
I think that's a universal thing. Every culture has a family holiday where everybody gets together, whether you call it Thanksgiving or something else. That part of it probably is pretty universal, right?
Right. And in my family, we found a balance. My husband comes to my Diwali celebrations, which happens like a couple of weeks prior, and I go to his Thanksgiving every year. So, and my parents we've never really had this big Thanksgiving holiday here anymore. My mom works. She works at a hospital, so she usually has hours there. So it's pretty quiet in my parents' side of the family, but my husband's family celebrates it every year. He refuses to travel during Thanksgiving. I'm always we have 2 days off. Maybe we should plan a vacation, and but it's pretty special. So
that's great. Sadikshya, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today's show. We hope everyone had a wonderful, safe, and healthy Thanksgiving, and that today's episode gives you some ideas about how to talk to your relatives about tough immigration issues over the holidays. Before we go, a quick reminder to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform, and share it with your friends and colleagues. You can also find more information about all of the issues we discuss here on the show today at bipartisanpolicy.org/immigration. You can follow us on Twitter at BPC_bipartisan. Theresa is on Twitter at BPC_T Brown. I'm Rachel Iacono. This Week in Immigration was created by Theresa Brown. The executive producer of This Week in Immigration is Theresa Brown. This week's episode was written by Theresa Brown and myself. Yafet Tawahara produces and edits our show. Join us again next time on This Week in Immigration.